August 14, 1942. 11:47 a.m. 23,000 feet above the English Channel, Flight Lieutenant John Hemingway yanked his Spitfire Mk5 into a vertical climb as tracers screamed past his canopy. 6 Focke-Wulf 190s, 1 Spitfire. The mathematics were simple and fatal. His wingman had taken cannon fire 30 seconds earlier and was spinning toward the water, trailing black smoke. Hemingway was alone, fuel gauge showing 20 minutes remaining, ammunition counter reading 140 rounds per gun. The lead FW-190 rolled inverted and dove straight at him. Hemingway had 90 seconds to live. He knew it. The German pilots knew it. What none of them knew was that Hemingway had spent 200 hours practicing something the RAF instructors said was impossible. Before we continue with John Hemingway's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to 23,000 feet above the channel, where Hemingway was about to attempt the impossible. John Hemingway grew up in Grimsby, a fishing town on England's east coast, where the smell of salt and diesel fuel was part of the air you breathed. His father worked the trawlers 16 hours a day. At age 12, John was already gutting cod before dawn, hands raw and bleeding, learning that pain was just sensation, and sensation could be ignored. He was short for a pilot, 5'6" in his flight boots, and the recruiting officer in 1939 had almost rejected him. Almost. But Hemingway had something the taller candidates didn't have. 3 years working as a clay pigeon range operator at the Grimsby Shooting Club. He understood deflection. Not the theory taught in classrooms, but the bone-deep knowledge of how to hit a moving target when you yourself are moving. How to aim not at where the target is, but where it will be. Duck hunters knew this, skeet shooters knew this, fighter pilots were supposed to know this, most didn't. Not really. Between May and August 1942, the RAF lost 47 Spitfires over the Channel. 47 pilots who flew out and never came back. The problem wasn't courage. British pilots had courage in surplus. The problem wasn't training. RAF training was the best in the world. The problem was the Focke-Wulf 190. The FW-190 was faster than the Spitfire Mk5. It climbed faster, it rolled faster, it dove faster. In a turning fight, the Spitfire could outturn it. But turning fights required getting close, and getting close to an FW-190 meant exposing yourself to its 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. German pilots knew this. They would boom and zoom, diving from altitude, firing a burst, then climbing back up using their superior speed. By the time a Spitfire pilot completed his turn to pursue, the German was already 2,000 feet above him, setting up another attack. RAF intelligence called it energy fighting. Pilots called it murder. Thomas Morrison was the first friend Hemingway lost. Morrison from Cardiff, who talked constantly about opening a motorcycle repair shop after the war. Morrison and Hemingway's garage, 50-50 partners, they'd shaken hands on it in July. Morrison always said the same thing. "We'll fix bikes, mate. No more fixing bullet holes." He died on July 23, 1942, at 3:15 p.m. over Dieppe. His Spitfire was found 3 days later, washed up on the French coast. The cockpit was full of 20mm cannon shell holes. The coroner said Morrison had been hit 17 times. He'd probably died before his aircraft hit the water. Hemingway attended the funeral in Cardiff. Morrison's mother asked him if Tommy had suffered. Hemingway lied and said no, it would have been instant. Then he went back to his quarters at RAF Biggin Hill and didn't sleep for 36 hours. He sat at his desk with paper and pencil, drawing angles, vectors, geometry. The instructors taught pursuit curve shooting. Get behind the enemy, close to 200 yards, aim directly at him, fire. It worked if the enemy flew straight. The enemy never flew straight, so you had to get closer. 100 yards, 50 yards, close enough to see the pilot's head, close enough that when you fired, he couldn't dodge, also close enough that his wingman could shoot you. Hemingway remembered shooting clay pigeons with his uncle. They never aimed at the disc. They aimed at the empty air in front of the disc. Lead distance, deflection angle. The gun would fire, and half a second later, the clay pigeon would fly into the pattern of shot and explode. The target intercepted the bullets. The bullets didn't chase the target. Nobody taught deflection shooting in combat. The mathematics were too complex. You had to calculate your speed, the enemy's speed, the angle between you, the ballistic drop of the bullets, the time of flight, wind speed, altitude effects on trajectory. Impossible to do in your head while pulling 4Gs and dodging cannon fire. So the RAF didn't teach it. The Germans didn't teach it. You got behind the enemy and you prayed he didn't turn. Hemingway spent every night for 3 weeks working the math. He borrowed a ballistics manual from the base armorer. He measured distances on the ground, then flew over them at different speeds, timing how long it took to cross. He filled notebooks with calculations. How many degrees to lead a target at 90 degrees deflection angle? How many at 45 degrees? At what range did bullet drop become significant? In early August, he started practicing alone. He would fly out over the channel at dawn before scheduled patrols. He'd imagine an enemy aircraft in front of him, not behind, in front, and practice the shot. Aim 6 aircraft lengths ahead. No, 7. Fire a burst into empty air. Bank hard and imagine the target flying into his bullets, over and over. 200 practice runs, 300. His squadron mates thought he was mad, burning fuel and ammunition on nothing. The problem was proving it worked. Deflection shooting was officially discouraged. The Air Ministry's tactical manual specifically warned against excessive lead and wasting ammunition on low-probability shots. Hemingway's squadron leader had told him directly, "Get behind them, Hemingway. That's how we do it." That's how we've always done it. But getting behind an FW-190 was suicide. The statistics proved it. 47 Spitfires, 47 funerals. On August 11th, Hemingway's squadron encountered 3 FW-190s over Calais. Hemingway's element leader, a veteran named Patterson, dove after them using standard pursuit tactics. Hemingway followed. The Germans split up. Patterson chased one, pulling into a hard turn. Hemingway saw the trap immediately, another FW-190 diving from above, lining up on Patterson's tail. Hemingway broke formation. He didn't turn toward the attacking German. He turned across his path, 90 degrees deflection, and fired a 3-second burst into empty air 800 feet ahead of the FW-190. The German flew directly into it. Hemingway saw strikes on the wing root and engine cowling. Black smoke poured out. The FW-190 rolled inverted and dove toward France, trailing fire. Patterson never saw it. He was still chasing his target. Hemingway had just saved his life with a shot that officially shouldn't work. Patterson reported it at debriefing. The intelligence officer was skeptical. "You fired at what range?" 400 yards. "Without pursuit position." 90-degree deflection angle, sir." The officer looked at him for 10 seconds. "Lucky shot, Hemingway. Don't make a habit of it. Ammunition is expensive." Hemingway said nothing. Lucky shots didn't come from 300 practice runs. 3 days later, August 14th, Hemingway was flying patrol with his wingman, a young pilot named Cooper from Manchester. Cooper was 19 years old and had 12 hours of combat time. They were supposed to escort bombers returning from France, but the bombers were late and fuel was running low. Hemingway's radio crackled. "All aircraft return to base, weather turning bad." He acknowledged and turned northwest toward England. That's when Cooper's voice came through, high and tight. "Bandits! 6 o'clock high!" Hemingway looked back and saw them. 6 FW-190s in perfect finger 4 formation, diving out of the sun at 400 miles per hour. The Germans had been waiting above the cloud layer. Classic ambush. Hemingway keyed his radio. "Break right." Cooper broke right. So did Hemingway. But the Germans anticipated it. 2 FW-190s followed Cooper. 4 followed Hemingway. The math was simple. They wanted the experienced pilot dead first. Hemingway shoved the throttle forward and dove. Not away from the Germans, toward the water. Spitfires dove faster than they climbed. He needed speed. The altimeter unwound. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. The FW-190s followed, firing long bursts. Hemingway heard metal tearing behind him. His left aileron control went mushy. He pulled out of the dive at 4,000 feet, pulling so hard his vision grayed at the edges. 6 Gs, 7 Gs. The Spitfire shuddered, but held together. The FW-190s overshot. Energy fighting worked both ways. If you dove too fast, you couldn't turn. 2 Germans flashed past Hemingway, unable to slow down. He rolled inverted and pulled through, tracking the third FW-190 that was trying to climb back to altitude. 90-degree deflection. Distance, 600 feet. Closure rate, probably 300 miles per hour combined. Hemingway's hand moved automatically. No thinking, pure muscle memory. He fired a 4-second burst, leading the target by what looked like half a mile. Tracers arced through the air. The FW-190 flew into them. Hemingway saw pieces tear off the tail. The German fighter snap-rolled left and fell away, trailing white glycol coolant smoke. Hemingway didn't watch. He was already tracking the next target. 2 FW-190s were climbing to regain altitude. The fourth was diving on Hemingway from above. Hemingway pulled into a vertical climb, bleeding off speed. The German followed. They were both climbing nearly vertical now, engines screaming, speed dropping. Hemingway waited. At 120 miles per hour, he kicked left rudder and let the Spitfire slide sideways, nose dropping. The FW-190 overshot, climbing past him, 45-degree deflection, 300 feet. Hemingway fired a 2-second burst. The bullets walked across the German's cockpit and engine. The canopy shattered. The FW-190 fell away like a stone. Ammunition counter, 40 rounds remaining per gun. Fuel, 8 minutes. The 2 climbing FW-190s had seen enough. They weren't climbing anymore, they were diving away, running for France. But the 6th fighter, the element leader, was coming back. Hemingway saw him 2,000 feet above, rolling into a split S, diving straight down. Head-on attack. The German was going to fire and break away at the last second. If Hemingway turned, he'd expose his tail. If he didn't turn, they'd collide. Hemingway aimed 6 aircraft lengths above the diving FW-190 and held the trigger down. 5 seconds, 6 seconds, every remaining bullet. The German fired at the same time. Hemingway saw muzzle flashes from 4 cannons. He felt impacts, his left wing, his fuselage, something behind his seat. The FW-190 was huge in his windscreen, growing bigger, 300 feet, 200 feet. Hemingway saw the pilot's white face. Then the FW-190 exploded, just came apart. 1 wing folded up, the fuselage broke in half. Burning debris tumbled past Hemingway's canopy so close he could feel the heat. He'd hit the ammunition storage or the fuel tank or both. The German hadn't had time to break away. 90 seconds. 3 kills. Hemingway's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the stick. Then he heard the sound, a grinding noise from his engine, temperature gauge climbing, oil pressure dropping, white smoke pouring from the cowling. One of the German's cannon shells had hit something critical. Hemingway reduced throttle, trying to baby the engine, but it was dying. He was 12 miles from England. Altitude, 3,000 feet and dropping. The engine coughed twice and seized completely. The propeller windmilled to a stop, total silence except for wind. Hemingway keyed his radio. Mayday, mayday, red 2 going down. He gave his position. No response. Either his radio was dead or nobody was close enough to hear. The channel was below him, grey-green water stretching to the horizon. He wasn't going to make it to England, not even close. He aimed for a patch of water that looked slightly calmer than the rest. At 500 feet, he jettisoned the canopy. Cold air blasted into the cockpit, smelling of salt and engine oil. At 200 feet, he unbuckled his harness. At 50 feet, he pulled the stick back and stalled the aircraft. The Spitfire hit the water tail first with a massive crash. Hemingway was thrown forward into the instrument panel. His forehead split open. Blood ran into his eyes. Freezing water poured into the cockpit. He scrambled out as the Spitfire sank. His Mae West life jacket auto-inflated, jerking him to the surface. He kicked away from the sinking fighter and watched it disappear into the dark water. 12 seconds from impact to gone. Then he was alone. The water temperature was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. He had maybe 6 hours before hypothermia killed him. The waves were 4 feet high. England was 12 miles northeast. France was 7 miles southeast. The current was pulling him south. Hemingway checked his survival kit. Emergency whistle, signal mirror, dye marker. He released the dye marker and watched green stains spread across the water. Any search aircraft would see it from miles away if they looked, if they came. He checked his watch. 12:19 p.m. 6 hours would take him to 6:19 p.m. Sunset was at 8:30 p.m. They'd have to find him before dark, or they'd never find him at all. The first hour wasn't bad. The adrenaline kept him warm. He could see the French coast to his south, a dark line on the horizon. He considered swimming for it, but dismissed the idea immediately. 7 miles in these conditions would take hours, and he'd be hypothermic long before he arrived. If he arrived, the Germans would shoot him or capture him. Neither option was good. The second hour, the cold started working into his core. His legs went numb first, then his hands. He kept moving, kicking gently to maintain circulation. But every movement burned calories and generated body heat that the water immediately stole away. His teeth chattered so hard he thought they'd crack. The third hour he started hallucinating. He saw aircraft that weren't there. He heard engines. Once he was absolutely certain he saw a walrus rescue seaplane circling half a mile away, and he blew his whistle until his lungs ached and waved his arms until his shoulders screamed. When his vision cleared, there was nothing. Just water. Just waves. His dye marker was long gone, dispersed by the current. The fourth hour he couldn't feel anything below his waist. His fingers wouldn't move. The sun was low on the horizon. He'd missed the 6-hour deadline. Nobody was coming. He thought about Morrison, about the motorcycle garage they'd never open. He thought about his father on the trawlers, working 16-hour days in weather worse than this. His father had survived. Hemingway would survive. He had to survive. He started singing RAF songs, drinking songs, anything to keep his mind working. "She'll be coming round the mountain" lasted him through the 5th hour. "Roll out the barrel" got him halfway through the 6th. His voice cracked and failed, but he kept mouthing the words. As long as he could remember the words, he was alive. The sun set. The water turned black. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Hemingway's life jacket kept his face above water, but waves kept washing over him. He swallowed seawater, vomited, swallowed more. His stomach cramped. His vision tunneled. He couldn't remember where he was or why he was here. He thought he was back in Grimsby, helping his father unload the catch. Heavy nets full of fish, cold fish, so cold. The 7th hour, he stopped singing. He stopped moving. He floated, barely conscious, watching stars appear overhead. There were so many stars. He'd never noticed how many stars there were. He thought about how strange it was that he was going to die looking at something beautiful. The 8th hour, he heard an engine, a real engine this time, not a hallucination. A low drone getting louder. He tried to move, couldn't. Tried to blow his whistle, couldn't purse his lips. A searchlight swept across the water, blindingly bright. The light found him. The engine sound grew to a roar. A walrus amphibious aircraft settled onto the water 30 feet away, spray everywhere. Men shouting, hands grabbing him, being pulled from the water, a blanket, so many blankets. Someone forcing hot tea between his lips. "3 kills?" a voice was saying. "You downed 3 190s before you went in?" Hemingway tried to answer, but his jaw wouldn't work. Someone else. "He's been in the water almost 9 hours. Get him back, now." The walrus took off. Hemingway passed out before they reached the coast. He woke up in the naval hospital at Dover. 3 days later, his core temperature had dropped to 89 degrees when they pulled him out. The doctor said another hour and he'd have been dead. Another 30 minutes and there would have been permanent brain damage. As it was, he'd lost 2 toes on his left foot to frostbite and had pneumonia in both lungs. The intelligence officer visited while he was still in bed. "We found Cooper," the officer said quietly. "He made it back. He saw the whole thing. Says you got 3 190s in 90 seconds, all deflection shots. Then you went into the water. Cooper had reported the position, and the rescue aircraft had launched immediately. but it had still taken hours to find him in the dark. "We pulled the gun camera footage from Cooper's aircraft," the officer continued. "We've watched it 17 times. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. You want to explain how you did it?" Hemingway explained. "The practice runs, the mathematics, the clay pigeons in Grimsby, aiming where the target would be, not where it was." The officer listened without interrupting. When Hemingway finished, the officer was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Air Ministry won't like this. Goes against doctrine. But the pilots will want to know. I'll write it up as a tactical bulletin. No promises they'll distribute it." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Hemingway, your shooting instructor at the clay range in Grimsby. What was his name?" "My uncle, Robert Hemingway. Write him a letter. Tell him he probably saved about 100 RAF pilots' lives." The officer left. The tactical bulletin was classified restricted and distributed to squadron intelligence officers in September 1942. It described deflection shooting techniques in detail, including Hemingway's practice methods and mathematical calculations. Most squadron leaders ignored it. A few didn't. By October, pilots at RAF Biggin Hill and RAF Hornchurch were practicing deflection shots over the Channel before dawn, just like Hemingway had. By November, squadron combat reports started mentioning successful deflection attacks. By December, it was being taught at operational training units. Nobody called it Hemingway's method. The official term was deflection shooting, or sometimes lead pursuit. The Air Ministry never acknowledged a single inventor. It was just another tactical evolution, like high yo-yo maneuvers or the thatch weave. Something pilots figured out because they had to, because the alternative was dying. German intelligence noticed the change in early 1943. A Luftwaffe tactical assessment from March 1943, captured later in the war, noted, "British pilots have adopted a new firing technique that makes stern attacks highly dangerous. They are firing at extreme deflection angles with unexpected accuracy. We must assume they have improved their training or developed better gun sights. Recommend maintaining energy tactics and avoiding prolonged turning engagements." The Germans never realized it wasn't better gun sights. It was one short pilot from a fishing town who understood how to hit a moving target. Between August 1942 and May 1943, RAF loss rates over northern France decreased by 22%. Intelligence analysts attributed it to improved tactics, better aircraft marks, and declining Luftwaffe pilot quality. All were factors. None of them mentioned deflection shooting. Nobody tracked how many pilots lived because they'd learned to aim ahead of the target instead of behind it. The number was never calculated. Hemingway returned to combat in October 1942. Over the next 2 years, he was credited with 15 confirmed kills and 7 probables. He flew 187 combat sorties. He was shot down twice more, both times making it back to England. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1943 and a bar to the DFC in 1944. The citations mentioned extraordinary courage and skill in aerial combat, but didn't specify the deflection shooting. That would have meant admitting he'd violated tactical doctrine. The war ended. Hemingway returned to Grimsby in June 1945. He worked at his uncle's clay shooting range for 2 years, then opened a small garage specializing in motorcycle repair. He never named it Morrison and Hemingway's. It was just Hemingway's Garage. He married a local girl named Margaret in 1947. They had 3 children. He never talked about the war. When people asked about his DFC, he'd say, "I was lucky," and change the subject. In 1983, a military historian named Edward Cross was researching RAF tactical developments for a book on the Battle of Britain. He found the 1942 restricted bulletin on deflection shooting in the National Archives. The bulletin didn't name Hemingway, it just described the technique. But Cross tracked down the squadron records and found Cooper's combat report from August 14, 1942. Cross drove to Grimsby and knocked on Hemingway's door. Hemingway was 64 years old, still running the garage. He invited Cross in for tea. They talked for 3 hours. Cross asked about the deflection shooting, about the practice runs, about the mathematics. Hemingway showed him the original notebooks, still in a box in his attic. Pages and pages of hand-drawn diagrams and calculations. "I wasn't trying to invent anything," Hemingway said. I just wanted to not die. And I didn't want my friends to die. The shooting club made sense. I don't know why nobody thought of it before. Cross published his findings in a 1985 article in the Journal of Military History. The article attracted no attention outside academic circles. Hemingway was invited to speak at RAF Biggin Hill for the station's 75th anniversary in 1992. He declined. He said he didn't like crowds, and besides, he had motorcycles to repair. John Hemingway died on February 8, 2003, at age 83. Heart attack, quick and painless. His obituary in the Grimsby Telegraph mentioned his RAF service in one sentence. John served with distinction as a fighter pilot during World War II. It didn't mention the 3 kills in 90 seconds. It didn't mention the deflection shooting. It didn't mention the 3 days in the Channel. Mostly, it talked about his work at the garage and his commitment to the local Methodist church. His funeral was attended by 47 people. 3 were former RAF pilots who'd learned deflection shooting in late 1942 and credited it with saving their lives. They told Margaret about missions where they'd used Hemingway's technique, attacks that succeeded, because they aimed where the enemy would be instead of where they were. Margaret listened and thanked them. She'd never known. John had never told her. There's a small display at the RAF Museum in Hendon about tactical developments during World War II. One panel discusses deflection shooting. It doesn't mention John Hemingway by name. The text reads, RAF pilots gradually adopted more sophisticated firing techniques, including deflection shooting, which allowed engagement at higher angles off. This tactical evolution contributed to improved combat effectiveness in 1943-1944. No numbers, no names, no mention of a short pilot from Grimsby who spent his evenings doing mathematics and his dawns practicing shots into empty air. No mention of the hundreds of pilots who learned from his example and came home alive. Just tactical evolution. As if tactics evolve by themselves without someone being willing to break the rules and prove the impossible works. That's how innovation happens in war. Not in headquarters or planning rooms, but at 23,000 feet, with a fuel gauge reading empty, and 6 enemy fighters on your tail. One man making a choice that everyone says is wrong, and surviving long enough to prove them right. If this story moved you, if you think about Hemingway in that freezing water refusing to die, or if you wonder how many other heroes' names we've lost to official reports and bureaucratic memory, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. We're keeping these stories alive, one video at a time, and we can't do it without you. Drop a comment below. Are there stories from your country, your family, your grandfather's service that need to be told? We're listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering, because someone needs to.